Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's telephone town hall with Congressman Andy Ogles. During the call, Congressman Ogles will be taking questions from participants like you. If you have a question and you'd like to ask this question, please press *3 at any time. Again, if you'd like to ask a question for Congressman Ogles, ask a question now by pressing *3. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at any time by pressing *6. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Congressman Ogles. Take it away.
Hey everybody, this is Congressman Andy Ogles here. I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day or evening to be with us tonight. I'm looking forward to giving you an update of these first few months of Congress and just let you know how it's been going, and of course hearing your questions. It'll be a little bit laid back, I'll hit some highlights and whatnot. But before we get into all that, I just want to reach out and say to all those that are listening from the Covenant School, the community, that our hearts are with you. As we continue to process this horrible tragedy that took place on March 27th. At roughly 10:13, our community was shattered. Our neighborhood was awakened to this growing crisis of mental illness, and then the nation tuned in. And so to the parents and the families of those lost, I can't express how sorry that I am, that we are for you, that we pray for you, that my family and I, we have you in our continued prayers for each and every one of you as we still continue to process this tragedy. And I think it should be noted and commend the Metro Police Department, especially Officers Engelbert and Collazo, for their courage and their valor in the face of danger. They acted quickly and professionally to eliminate the threat, the shooter. And you got to keep in mind that, as the events were unfolding and they're moving through that school and, they reached the dead end where they could go left or right, they heard gunshots. And in that moment, they heard gunshots to the right, and they made a split-second decision to go towards the shooter, towards the gunfire, and in doing so, they saved countless lives. And, to the school, they did everything right. The school was locked. The teachers locked their doors. The administrator engaged to protect those children. And so I think as we move forward, we'll see that these officers will be remembered for their heroics, but then will also be studied for future officers as they learn how to process and engage in an active shooter situation. I've introduced a lot of legislation. We'll get to that in a minute, but I've specifically, authored and offered up the Covenant School Heroes Congressional Gold Medal Act. This honors Engelbert and Collazo for their service to our community, to our state, and to our country. And again, I've introduced a lot of legislation, but this is by far one of my top priorities as we start this busy Congress, and of course me being a new member of Congress as we go forward. And there's a lot of things that we can talk about. Our country's at a crossroads politically, culturally, economically. There's a lot we can discuss, a lot we should be concerned about. Just to name a few: China, the economy, Russia's aggression, taxpayer funds in Ukraine, Biden's inept policies, a border that's wide open, a fentanyl crisis that's killing Americans, or the bank crisis that kind of started to unfold a few weeks ago. And so I just want to pause for a moment. When you, in light of our community in the shooting, all of that's going on in our world and our country, Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." We have to do our part to lead our country and to fight the good fight and to do the right thing. But at the end of the day, just know that God is there and God is listening. So enough with the preaching. But I just wanted, in these uncertain times, I think it's important to remember who we are as a country and where we came from. As we start this, and we're going to talk about a lot of issues, a lot of that I just kind of rambled off, but I want to take you back in time to first the speaker's race and talk you through that, because there's a lot of negative media, and then of course then the response once we won that fight, and then of course I'll give you a few highlights before we kind of get into some of the topics and questions. But when I ran for office, I ran to make a difference and to go fight. I was known as a mayor here in Maury County that refused to comply with the mandates. I kept our community open. I wouldn't go along. I shielded our community from, the Biden administration and some of their policies. And, I wanted to do that at that next level. And so with the speaker's race, it was never about Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy's a nice guy. I've gotten to know Kevin. But, and I always say this, I use these two names as a good example. Jim Jordan, he's a conservative. He's a member of the Freedom Caucus. Congressman Mark Green from Tennessee, he's a friend of mine. So if either one of those gentlemen were running to be speaker, I still would have wanted those things that we were fighting for in the speaker's race, which was the ability to offer amendments, the ability to cut spending, to create accountability for the speaker's chair. Because what's happened over the last decade is that a lot of power was taken away from your quote-unquote rank and file member, which is what I am, meaning I'm not in leadership. And it was shifted to the leadership house or suite, if you will. And what we did is in that leadership battle, we were wanting to restore what our founding fathers intended. And I always use John Quincy Adams as a good example of that. He was a member of the House. He was a member of the Senate. He was president of the United States. He was ambassador to multiple countries. And when he decided to retire, what did he do? He returned to the House of Representatives. Why? Because it was the people's house. It was the most raucous chamber. That's where you argued and debated. And you debated for the better outcome for the American people. That's what happened during the speaker's battle. We were fighting to make a difference and to ensure that as a member of Congress, I and every other congressman or congresswoman would be able to do their job. And so immediately the media kind of, even conservative media kind of jumped on us, and the 20 of us were disrupting the country, and it was a disgrace, et cetera, et cetera. And then once they realized what we were fighting for and what we were able to attain, suddenly it was like, oh, okay, we get it now. And so as we go forward, and that's why as a freshman, I've been able to offer spending cuts and multiple pieces of legislation because I have that ability now as a member of Congress. Just a few highlights. I've introduced 4 bills that have been passed, co-sponsored 82 bills. I've sent 10 letters to the House Appropriations Committee to cut on wasteful spending, submitted a total of 75 appropriation letters to cut spending. I joined numerous efforts by my colleagues to send agencies letters to agency to stop the invasion of the southern border, accountability for the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and of course, obviously everything that's gone with Silicon Valley Bank. And then regarding bills, floor amendments, my office as a freshman is the most productive freshman office in the House. And I want to thank my team, my staff for all of their hard work, because there's a lot of research and a lot of due diligence that goes into, Steve Scalise has his energy bill, comprehensive energy package reform. 2 of those amendments came from my office, from my team. And of course, obviously, we go through that process. We work with leadership to make sure that they're good with the amendment that we're offering. We work with industry to make sure that it wouldn't have any adverse or unintended consequences. And, we get those out there and get them passed. And again, that's a team effort by my staff, and I'm incredibly grateful. I think I have the best team in Congress, and I'm proud to say that. But kind of talking on some of the issues, just last week I introduced the Defund China's Allies Act, which would prohibit taxpayer-funded financial aid to any country that are in cahoots, collaborating, consorting with the Chinese Communist Party. Because what you got to realize, a lot of those dollars that we indirectly funneled to China is going to build their battleships. That money that's going to China is building up their armaments that they're flexing and threatening Taiwan, and then ultimately being aggressive towards the United States. And so, one of the amendments that I had on the energy bill was the amendment that would ban Chinese companies from mining on federal lands here in the United States. And that passed with bipartisan support. It was, I think, 405 to 24. The 24 no votes were Democrats. But even then, it was a bipartisan piece of legislation because it is in the best interest of our country. When you look to my committee, which is financial services, if you don't know what financial services is, that has to do with all things banking and investments. It's got a broad reach because, again, as dollars flow through the economy, through your both legal and illegal systems or supply chains, all that would fall underneath the Financial Services Committee, including world banks and international institutions. And so one of my priorities as a member of the Financial Services Committee is to crack down on money being funded to China that it ultimately is being used against us. One of the things I mentioned as we first started was the economy, and of course the banking crisis, kind of dovetails with that. But we're facing an economic downturn. And have been for the past 2 years. And I want to back up a moment. And one of the things that's been frustrating for me, now that I'm a member of Congress and I'm watching this, is look, kind of Econ 101, when the government puts too much money into the economy, more money than the economy can produce on its own, that's going to create some sort of inflation. The only question is how large or what's the extent of that inflation, and then what's the time period that inflation is going to kind of hit or be seen or realized in the marketplace. And so you have trillions of dollars being put into the economy during COVID, and I understand that's a separate conversation why that was done, but you knew that inflation was coming. And when you have inflation, you're going to have recessionary pressures. And so this was building to this crescendo, and there didn't seem to be a plan on how to deal with it. And then suddenly the Fed reacts and perhaps overreacted because they sat on their hands for too long. And now you have these interest rate hikes that are affecting small town America left and right. And now we know, and I've been, singing this cry for a long time, that we're headed towards a recession. The only question is how large, how bad of a recession, and again, when does it kind of set into the economy? But as we go forward, as we look for solutions, we continue to offer legislation to undo some of Biden's bad policies. And one of the things that I introduced was a repeal of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. So his was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which was a handout to the green new energy movement, to the woke corporations funding him. And so it was the Inflation Reduction Act of 2023, which takes that money. So again, keep in mind, what's causing inflation is the government putting too much money in the economy. Well, what did he do with his quote-unquote Inflation Reduction Act? He spent more money, more taxpayer money. So that was the exact opposite of what we needed to do at a time that we're facing inflation and ultimately a recession that's on the horizon. And so what I did was offer a piece of legislation that would repeal that. And during the State of the Union, Biden called out my legislation because it was such a threat to he and his policies, which again, he's, and I said this on Fox News yesterday, is that the reason why, Biden is stalling on the debt ceiling, I'm kind of get ahead of myself, but, I'll go ahead and go down this path, but is that, he has all these campaign promises that he has to uphold, the Green New Deal, this Inflation Reduction Act, which is a handout to the corporations that he needs to fund his reelection campaign. So that's why he's stalling and not wanting to negotiate on the debt ceiling, because he's between a rock and a hard place. Because if he does the right thing for America, he's going to have to go back on some of those promises, right? And so as we look to rein in federal spending and start, to creating an environment where Americans can invest again, one thing we can do is to get things right with the budget and the debt ceiling. And, I'm a proud member of the House Freedom Caucus. I'm proud to stand with them because we've offered a plan that will, it does increase the debt ceiling, but it has a plan over 10 years to cut. So, one of the things we're asking for is to go back to pre-COVID spending levels, which is beyond ridiculous that Biden refuses to even discuss this as part of the negotiating process. But what we've got to do is take away the limitless spending and start protecting the interest of Americans instead of, again, of these Washington special interests that are funding he and his campaign as he looks to run for re-election. But, I would say, rest assured, Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, myself, we're delivering on those promises that we've been making, that we've already secured legislative wins in the House on American energy production. We're putting power, of the classroom back in the hands of parents instead of unions. Again, going back to Scalise's energy bill, H.R. 1, one of the biggest drivers of inflation over the past 2 years has been not only the money put into the economy, but also the Biden's policies, the Democrats' war on American energy. And as you see, energy market prices directly are impacting nearly the price of everything in our economy. I mean, there's nothing on the grocery shelf that isn't touched by fossil fuels, gas, oil, some way. So H.R. 1 directly addresses our country's energy crisis by putting us back on that path towards energy independence, and in turn, that helps reduce some of those inflationary pressures and lowering costs for families, right? And so, again, the Lower Energy Cost Act, which is H.R. 1, increases our domestic output from production to exportation. It reduces regulatory burdens, which is one of my bills that I had in there on gas leases, and reforms the permitting across sectors of the economy, because as you remove barriers for these companies to produce energy, and again, we've got enough oil and gas in this country. We shouldn't be dependent on Russia or China or the Middle East for our energy, because we have it here in our backyard. And if we found oil in my front yard, I'd say drill, baby, drill. So I mean, again, it's one of those things. So let's get back to this place where we are energy independent. And then going back to the power of parents in the classroom, we saw through COVID as children, I guess one of the silver linings and, what was COVID, and obviously was, lives were lost, and it was a frightening time period in our country, was that parents were more engaged in their child's learning. And suddenly, because children were learning remotely, we learned what was taking place in the classroom. And so what we're doing is, with the, by empowering parents, by ensuring a parent's Bill of Rights that we passed, we put oversight back in the hands of the parents. The schools are supposed to be preparing children for real life, not discussing gender identity politics. So again, let's talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic. And again, put parents in charge of raising their children and not having a leftist agenda being promoted by a weak president who's more focused on the transgender issue than he is our adversaries, which are Russia and China. So, with that, I could go on and pontificate, but let's start taking some questions, Grant. So if you want to ask a question, you can press *3. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Grant.
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, and as Congressman Ogles said there, if you want to ask a question, press *3. We'll get you lined up in the queue here. And also press *6 to subscribe to our newsletter. Let's ask this first question here from the Spring Hill area. Here's the question, Congressman. President Trump's indictment has caused me to lose faith in our justice system. Is anything being done to ensure this does not happen again? And what happens to Trump now?
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's front of mind, and I think it is a slippery slope. Look, political retribution, didn't work for the Roman Empire. It didn't work in the British Empire. It's not going to work here in the United States. And so suddenly, if this indictment by this liberal activist district attorney who literally campaigned on getting Trump. He didn't campaign on justice. He didn't campaign on seeking truth. He campaigned on getting Trump, on delivering a scalp, if you will. And so what he's doing is delivering on a campaign promise versus upholding the oath of office, which is justice and truth. And look, I'm not a fan of President Obama. And I can say that, his voice makes my blood pressure go up, okay? But I would be appalled at the idea that for some political reason that he would be run up on some charges, and I'd say trumped up charges, no pun intended, because some activist DA is trying to get him for whatever reason. I would be appalled by that. And you should be appalled, whether it's Obama or Biden or Trump or whomever the next president is. Because if we're going to start this path where Trump's going to be indicted, now you have DAs across the country looking to see if they can indict an Obama, or looking to the future to see if they can indict Biden. That's a scary place to find our country. And I think the blatant weaponization of the United States justice system is disturbing. I think Alvin Bragg is an affront to the legitimacy of the American judiciary. And though I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, I support efforts by Chairman Jim Jordan to create transparency and expose what I think is woke corruption coming out of this state, coming out, and I say this, that state, and out of that district attorney's office.
Again, if you have any questions, press *3 to get in queue to ask a question to Congressman Ogles. And also, if you're on right now, in order to gauge the opinions of those that are in the audience, we'll be asking a couple poll questions throughout this thing tonight. So here's our first poll question. Yes is number 1, 2 is number no. Press 1 for yes and press 2 for no. Here's the question. Do you think Biden's anti-American energy policies are responsible for rising energy costs? If you're in the audience, press 1 for yes and 2 for no. Do you think Biden's anti-American energy policies are responsible for rising energy costs? And Congressman Ogles, let's go to a question here, again, in light of the recent tragedy that took place in Nashville. I'll do a combined question from Tyler and Mark here. Mark asking from the Green Hills area, are there any ideas right now to prevent these shootings in a proactive way, a proactive plan, not a reactive plan, to prevent these shootings in the future?
Yeah, and I think that's an issue that's front of mind for a lot of people, but especially here in Middle Tennessee. If you're not aware, the Covenant School not only is in Nashville, but is actually in the 5th Congressional District. And so, again, it's one of those things from the very beginning. I reached out to the mayor, to the chief's office, and just didn't want to be in the way. And just was there as a support and to offer support and to see what they needed. Is there anything that we could do to come alongside them as we go through this process? As far as shootings go in particular, I want to give caution, but then also an answer. So bear with me for a moment. Rahm Emanuel, he was a former congressman, chief of staff to Obama. He's famously quoted as never let a crisis go to waste. And so what you've seen with this shooting and other shootings is this raising of the flag that we need to start banning guns or specifically assault weapons. And what that's not addressing is the root cause of how or why did this shooting occur. And the answer to that question is mental illness. And so let me be clear. Just a couple of days ago in Mississippi, you had a mentally ill individual go to a hardware store and bought an axe, then proceeded to go to a homeless shelter and attack one of the workers there with the axe. After the individual was on the ground, the person with mental illness got a knife and continued the attack. When they got bored with the knife, they went back to the axe and ultimately killed the victim. You've had individuals who have gotten in their vehicles, mental illness, driven into crowds. You see in different parts of the country and around the world people being pushed off of subway platforms. And so bad people are going to do bad things. Cain, Abel, Rock. We can't ban our way out of this. And so what we've got to do is address the core issue, which is mental illness, and I'll get to that in a second. But again, to underscore my point that the left and this White House is using the victims of this tragedy, 3 children and the 3 adults, to pursue their agenda, which is to take your constitutional right. And it is a right. And you don't have to exercise it, but it's your right. That they go back 2 years, 2 Christmases ago, to a Christmas card that my family and I posed in. And I had a reporter ask me, well, and if you haven't seen the photo, I think most everybody has, it's even been on Saturday Night Live, is there's 5 of us, the 4, my wife and I and our 2 big kids, we're holding guns, we're holding them properly, safely, they were unloaded, etc. And our youngest was holding kind of a little Merry Christmas sign as a Christmas card. And so suddenly we are the poster children for gun violence, and it's our fault. Well, in reality, so this reporter asked me, do we regret taking that picture? And my answer was simple. Why would I regret taking a photograph with my family, and why would I regret exercising my constitutional right to bear arms? And I'm not going to waver from that point there, is you have a right to bear arms. You can choose not to exercise it. So on the issue of mental illness, what can we do to address mental illness in this country? Because it's sweeping the nation. I think a lot of it's being driven by social media. That's my humble opinion. A lot of it's being driven by the drugs that are sweeping across our country, pouring in from the southern border. That's another issue we can talk about. You have a presidency, a White House that is working against you and I and working against our children. We know the government wastes money. One such agency that wastes a lot of money is the Department of Education. But we could take not only the money that they waste, but we could take the money that they're spending on CRT, DEI, and all the other woke nonsense in their curriculums, and we could divert those funds. So no new spending. We could simply take those funds and put those dollars towards mental illness, getting counselors in the schools that have the proper training so that maybe the next child that's in jeopardy, whether it's just a mental illness, maybe it's a crisis in a home, whether it's financial, maybe the household's being split up, maybe there's abuse or bullying that's taking place, maybe there's a mechanism in place to get that child help. And so that it doesn't continue to grow, metastasize, and then that person becomes a shooter with severe mental illness, and they're treating it self-treating it with drugs, which is what was happening in this case.
Thank you for that answer, Congressman.
Let me just say, we have a problem in this country. We have the funds to address it. Banning guns is not the solution. Addressing mental illness is. Sorry, Grant, go ahead.
No, that's fine. That actually addresses Melissa's question out of Nashville. She asked before. I wanted to thank you for opening the event with the prayers for the shooting victims. And wanted to ask, do you believe that the gun crisis, in addition to mental health crisis, you covered that right there without even asking. Switching gears here a little bit, Congressman, I know this one is near and dear to your heart as well, given that you're sitting on a working group for ESGs up here in D.C. Here's the question from Douglas in Nolensville. ESGs, what actions are we taking to eliminate ESG from banking?
Well, and that's a work in progress, and that's a great question. So if you're not familiar with ESG, I'll give you kind of the technical answer, and then I'll give you an example of what you're seeing kind of in current news right now. So ESG is environment, social, and governance, and so basically it's a score that certain companies are thrusting into the banking system. And trying to hold these companies accountable by ranking them or rating them based on how environmentally friendly. So ESG, the E is environment, and so the E in ESG is literally targeting oil and gas industry in the United States of America. The E in ESG is literally designed to cripple us as a nation and make us dependent on other nations. That's how serious this is. Then you get to the social, then you get to the governance. And so a good, I think, manifestation of that, in my humble opinion, is where you see this controversy with Bud Light and this Dylan or whatever transgender guy who's pretending to be a woman. That is a outcome of ESG being thrust onto corporations. So this wokeness that you see now that's become kind of commonplace or more commonplace is a product of the ESG. And so on the Financial Services Full Committee, I serve on 3 subcommittees and a 4th, a working group / subcommittee, and it is the subcommittee on ESG. And so we are looking at this. We're taking it very seriously, and quite frankly, one of the reasons why I wanted to run for Congress, and there's a list of reasons, but this is on that list, is to go after and eliminate ESG from our banking system, because it is literally designed to make us subservient to our enemies and to Europe. Grant?
And for everyone listening right now, again, quick reminder, press *3 on your phones right now if you want to get in the queue to ask a question to Congressman Ogles, and press *6, and that'll automatically subscribe you to our weekly newsletter, a great wrap-up of things going on in district and D.C. Press *6 for that. Congressman, let's switch gears a little bit again here to the education vein. Donna out of Nashville asked this. Congressman mentioned putting education back in the hands of parents. What does he think of Wit and Wisdom, CRT, being taught at public schools, and why are they still being taught this?
Well, if it were up to me, and again, great question. Again, part of the outcome, if you will, a silver lining from COVID, and to all those who lost someone during COVID, please understand I'm not making light of COVID. I had a dear friend who died from COVID. But that being said, is that more parents became aware of what was being taught, became aware of the phrase of wit and wisdom, or CRT, or social and emotional learning. All of those are kind of related to one another. And at the end of the day, we've got to get back to, again, what I said earlier, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And we have to, again, I believe that one of the problems we have in this country is that we're teaching to test, not teaching kids how to learn. So our children go to a classical school. It's a classical curriculum where you teach children how to think, not what to think. You teach them how to think, rather, and then you put in front of them rich content, and then let them, because you've taught them how to think from themselves, as you taught them, and obviously it's a Christian school, so it's from a Christian worldview, but they're learning to process that information on their own terms. And because it's a private school, some kids excel, some kids don't, and we've got an environment now where everybody gets a trophy. And we're teaching, forgive me for saying this, but to the lowest common denominator in many cases, instead of challenging our children to learn, to creating an environment of learning. So we've got to get, quite frankly, the bureaucrats in D.C. out of education in this country. The Department of Education is a fairly new department. It's not constitutional, if you will. It's not mandated by the Constitution. And so I personally would cut the dickens out of their budget. I personally would like to see it go away. I would prefer to block grant all of those dollars back to the states, unencumbered. And look, what you've got to understand is we are a republic of free states. Now, what does that mean? That means California has the right to be liberal. That means Tennessee has the right to be conservative. That means Tennessee has the right to be Christian, by the way. That means South Dakota can be conservative, South Carolina or Texas or Florida. And so California can do what it wants to do. If they want to go towards socialism, that's on them. We, however, should be able to drift towards conservatism. That's not how this one-size-fits-all government works. It works against our republic. So whether it's one-size-fits-all education or healthcare, et cetera, it's working against the freedoms that our founding fathers intended. And so, again, I would cut the Department of Education drastically. I would give those dollars back to the states. I think there's even an opportunity where you could incentivize states to have better outcomes, actual teaching outcomes, and so there's more dollars available for those states. I mean, let's start thinking outside of the box and reward schools and districts and states that are truly seeing gains in teaching children reading, writing, and arithmetic versus whether it's okay for a boy to wear a dress, which, again, it's a free country. If you're a dude in a dress, that's your business, but you don't have a right to teach that to my children. And if that offends you, it's a free country. You be you, but that means I get to be me.
And again, we're getting somewhat close to the end of this teletown hall for tonight, so a reminder to everybody listening, press *6 to automatically subscribe to our newsletter. Congressman, here's a question coming from Henry out of the Spring Hill area. He asks, it looks like Congress is on track to miss its budget deadline for the 20th year in a row. President Biden's own budget proposal request was over a month late, and he seems unwilling to work with Speaker McCarthy to find a solution. What is the plan to get Biden to come to the table and prevent default while also putting our nation's finances on sound footing?
Yeah, and so from a Freedom Caucus perspective, again, great question. From a financial services question, that's really top of mind for me, and really for, I would say, most members of Congress. And look, I think it's important to understand that there's two phrases that get used interchangeably, but they shouldn't be. You can have a government shutdown, and then you can have a default, and they're not the same thing. And so Republicans have made it clear that we are going to fund our debt. We are going to fund and take care of our seniors. We've made that abundantly clear. The White House, meanwhile, has been using rhetoric and saying, well, the Republicans just want to cut this, that, and the other. The Republicans are going to, et cetera. Again, baseless claims, rhetoric versus substance. And so what this gets back to is that Biden is so focused on his budgetary handouts to these corporations that are funding him, these budgetary handouts to the leftists within his own party. That's why he's not coming to the table, because he doesn't know what to do right now. And so, again, going back to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which, again, we know what caused inflation. It was the too much money that the government put into the economy. What does he do? Instead of cutting spending, instead of pulling back so that we don't have inflation or that we reduce inflation, he wants to spend more money. He wants to put more inflationary pressures on our economy, hurting hard-working Americans. Look, if you're going to the grocery store and you're paying more for milk, and by the way, we drink a lot of milk in our household. Milk is more expensive today. Eggs are more expensive today, et cetera, et cetera. Go all the way down on fuel. Even though the price of fuel has come down, it's more expensive today than it was under Trump. Those are hurting hardworking Americans, those that can least afford it. And so I think we continue to answer the question, like, how do we get him to the table? We continue to tell the truth. We continue to offer substantive options on how we can fix this economy. That's what the Freedom Caucus has done with our plan. Now, our plan, I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that there aren't areas that we need to discuss. I'm not saying that there isn't room there for negotiations, but we got to start somewhere. And the Freedom Caucus has taken the lead on that. We got our plan out there. McCarthy and the leadership team has been working with every member of Congress. And so I received literally a call from Mr. Emmer on my way home this past week talking about, hey, here's some ideas we have on this budget. This is what we'd like to propose. And so there's this ongoing talk. There is ongoing kind of back channel communications with the White House. I can't say that it's bore any fruit yet, but we are all working very hard to do a couple of things. One, making sure that this country does not default on its debt. We're not going to do that. Two, we are going to take care of our seniors. And three, we've got to have a clear path on how are we going to handle this runaway spending and how we're going to control and get us to a point of a balancing, at least somewhere on the horizon. And it may be far off in the horizon because we didn't get here overnight. How are we going to start balancing this budget? Grant?
Again, everybody, *3 puts you in the queue to ask a question to Congressman Ogles. And as you heard me say earlier in the conversation, in order to gauge the opinions of those in the audience, we will be asking a few poll questions throughout the night here. And here's the second poll question. It's one that's been talked about quite a bit in media as of late. Here's the question. Do you think the U.S. should ban TikTok? Press 1 for yes, 2 for no. Do you think the U.S. should ban TikTok? Press 1 for yes and 2 for no. And Congressman, in that same vein of kind of the reason for that TikTok ban, Karen asks from Old Hickory, China now owns a substantial portion of farmland in the U.S. Why is this happening, and how do we stop this?
Yeah, and so, when you go back to Scalise's energy bill, one of the things one of my amendments that was passed, it was a bipartisan bill or amendment, which prohibited China from mining on federal lands here in the United States. It passed 405 to 24, which is overwhelming support, is to start holding China accountable and, quite frankly, keeping them out of our country. Yeah, I think we should prohibit China from, buying up our farmland and, quite frankly, turning around and exporting those goods straight to China. But it's more than just that. So on the immediate term, like, how do we address that issue? Because I think that's one of the reasons why you asked that question is Congress is a big ship that turns slowly. And so I would challenge our general assemblies and our governors at the state level, like Kristi Noem in South Dakota, of banning those types of purchases and operations in her state. And so I commend her for that. Now, that being said, that kind of touches on another issue of China is clearly being an aggressor. I think the reason for that, one, is you can look at Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I think Russia did that because of Biden's failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so Russia saw that we retreated and retreated in an abysmal fashion from the Middle East and saw that we were weak. He took action, invaded Ukraine. Meanwhile, China's watching to see what we and the rest of the world does in Russia. And so, which is why you see this balloon that we first were told was a weather balloon, which is a bunch of nonsense. We know it was a spy balloon that directly flew over sensitive and military installations all across this country. And it wasn't until the media outrage, the outrage of the American people, that they finally shot the thing down. They had plenty of time to engage, but this feckless, weak administration who's working against hardworking, everyday Americans. They're running up the price of fuel. They're running up inflation. They're running us headlong into a recession, is bowing down to the Chinese. And I say, no, I've had enough. We could have engaged. We could have stopped that balloon and sent a clear message to China that you're not welcome, which, again, is why I offered my amendment to hold China, the Chinese government. And then, look, I'm not talking ill of the Chinese people. There's a difference between the Chinese people and the CCP, and we've got to keep them out of their country. We've got to recognize they're the enemy. We've got to start treating them like they're the enemy. We've got to recognize the fact that they are making moves towards taking Taiwan. Grant.
Congressman, there's a few questions actually lining up here, all of which seem to have to do with relating towards the SVB, Silicon Valley Bank closure. Here's one. Can you tell us what happened with the collapse of that bank and whether the same thing might happen to other banks?
Okay, so not to get too far in the weeds on the technical aspects of what caused the Silicon Valley, SVB, and Signature banks, and one in California, one in New York, is that, banks, they take your deposits, your cash, and they invest those. And so part of what they're required to do is hold some of those and they lend those dollars out, but they're required to hold some of those dollars available so that if you go to the bank and you say, I want my money, I need to close my account, I'm moving, whatever, that you can have that money immediately. And so what happened with both of these banks is that those monies that they were supposed to have liquid, meaning that they were immediately available for disbursement. Again, if you were to go to the bank and request it, they had put those monies in long-term investments. And so when you had one of their largest, speaking of Silicon Valley Bank in California, shareholders and depositors say, hey, I want my money, they didn't have the ability to offer that deposit request. And so that's an oversimplification of the process, but in short, both of those banks were poorly managed, and you had a situation where the depositors were getting nervous, they wanted their money back, and though they had plenty of assets and investments on paper, they couldn't cash those out immediately, and so that caused the bank. There's a mechanism where the FDIC, the government, can step in. It's called a systemic risk exception, which allows the government to take extraordinary measures to calm the markets or calm the consumer. So to answer your question, I don't think that you're going to see or we're seeing a collapsing of the banking system. What we've seen play out here is two banks were poorly managed, and they had a specific situation that created an exposure, and that, again, resulted in their collapse. I think the bigger issue, and I won't go into the weeds on that one either, is Swiss Bank failing. Switzerland has long been kind of a repository of global funds. They've had two banks there, and the fact that one of those banks had to be consumed by the other one, I think, won't go into the weeds on that one. That's probably the bigger issue that's been underreported. But that being said, doesn't affect us, but has more to do with the global economy. But I'll say, rest assured, we acted swiftly. We're watching this very closely. I have faith in the banking system. All of my money's still in the bank. It's not under a mattress anywhere. And I think the questions that need to be asked is there were warning signs, especially for SVB, that there were problems. The FDIC, the Fed, they did not take the appropriate actions, in my opinion, to hold that bank accountable. Again, you have a regulatory environment both in California and New York that's supposed to monitor and catch these kinds of weaknesses in a specific bank. Now, I'll caution, I think Reagan famously said, and I'll paraphrase this, the scariest phrase in the American language is, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." I think what we've got to be careful here is for Congress not to overreact to this situation to create more regulation for banks. And what that will ultimately do is it'll make it more expensive for banks to operate. And that'll mean for you and I, working class Americans, it'll be harder to get a mortgage. It'll be harder to get a line of credit. It'll be harder to refinance your business or to get that loan for your car. That's my biggest concern, is that either the banking industry, and we've seen this past month, we saw mortgages drop significantly that were being issued by banks. Why? Because banks are pulling back a little bit. So what we're trying to do is calm the markets, calm the marketplace, and make sure that the true victim in this situation, that you have two banks that were poorly managed. You have regulatory systems in California and New York that failed, that the ultimate victim will be working class Americans that want to refinance their home. And they're looking at, say, a $250,000 house. And now because the bank is nervous, they can only afford a $200,000 house. That's the biggest concern I have. We've seen a little bit, a peek into the window that's occurring. My hope is that now that the marketplace has settled out, that won't occur, and that we'll continue to move forward. I would expect, this is just a guesstimate on my part, you're looking at perhaps one more rate increase. If the unemployment numbers are greater than expected, that may be pulled back because it will give the Fed a reason why not to raise interest rates. And I think perhaps you'll see a calming on when it comes to the banking system and interest rates, et cetera. And again, my apologies for kind of getting into the weeds on that issue, but it's a complex issue, and it's a great question, and I think it's front of mind for everyone. I even had my dad, when this was all unfolding, text me and said, "Son, is the banking system about to collapse?" I was like, "No, Dad, it's not going to collapse. Stand by. We're working on it." So rest assured, we're in a good place. We are the reserve currency for the world. We're the United States of America. We're the greatest nation that's ever existed, and my goal and the goal of the House Freedom Caucus, Republicans and Republican leadership, is to make sure that we maintain that dominant status, that we maintain that we're the top predator economically, globally, militarily, and not be subservient to a Russia and China that is on the move. They're prowling. They're on the prowl, and we've got to recognize that. Grant?
Congressman, a question here from Jeffrey out of Wilson County. This is pertaining to the ATF overriding Congress about the pistol brace rule. He wants to know where you stand on that, what you think of ATF overstepping Congress on that one, and in general, how you feel about that pistol brace rule.
Well, when it comes to the Second Amendment, I would point him to my Christmas card and the hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million worth of negative media that I've been subject to over the last couple of weeks or 10 days, because I'm so 2A, because I'm such a vocal supporter of the Second Amendment, because I think the government has overstepped its bounds, because I don't think that guns are the problem. I think people with mental illness are the problem. I think a system that is afraid to address and talk about it is the problem. I think an education system that's more worried about a woke agenda and transgender issues versus teaching our children is the problem. And I think what we're seeing now is a manifestation of failed Democrat policies in the marketplace, in our schools, and unfortunately with some of these shootings. But to your point, I think we should be concerned not only about the ATF, but any agency that is overriding Congress, any agency that is going around Congress. So one of the things that we fought for with the speaker's race was the committee that would look into the FBI, the weaponization of the FBI, and how they were targeting Americans. And we know that they were hiding evidence. Again, regardless of where you stand on January 6th, that's not the topic at hand. You have people that were held without due process. The prosecutors weren't releasing the evidence. And then thanks to Kevin McCarthy, he releases the video footage to Fox News. And what do we see? Talk about the shaman in particular. He's walking around peacefully through the halls of Congress with multiple Capitol Police. They're actually checking the doors for him, almost giving him a tour. He was almost immediately released. Why? Because the evidence was clear that it was not an insurrection. Now, you have people that broke into that building, and that broke my heart. You had people that go into offices and they trespassed and they got into desks, et cetera, et cetera. There were crimes committed. But the notion that this was an insurrection is nonsense. And this idea that an agency, whether it's the IRS or the FBI or the ATF, is suddenly weaponized against America. And what is this, Rome? That we have a new president and suddenly all of these agencies are going to be working against you and I say no. And I say, heck no.
Congressman, in that vein, Tedra from Columbia asks, how can we hold our leaders accountable, especially our lawless leaders accountable, when the ones who are supposed to hold them accountable are lawless themselves? She's specifically talking about FBI, she puts in quotes here, and the weaponization of our government. Can you expound upon that a little bit more?
Well, kind of touched on that already, but I mean, I think, again, that's why, as we were going through that speaker's battle and, the 20 of us that stood up and said, wait a minute, this is not what our founding fathers intended, that we've got to do better, that we've got to be able to offer amendments, that we've got to be able to have a committee, a judiciary that can investigate whether it's the IRS or the FBI. We have to have a process for that, and we fought for those things. And what was disappointing for me, and kind of it's related but tangential a little bit, is that some of the conservative pundits that had talked about Congress is broken, we've got to do something, we've got to fix something, and you have the 20 of us stand up, and we're trying to do something, and suddenly we're vilified. And then a few days later, when they realized, oh, wait a minute, when we actually achieved our outcome, they're like, yeah, they were right. Now, I haven't gotten an apology for that. I don't really want one or need one. But the point is you're right. We can't allow or stand by. This is a republic. This is a free country. And the idea that an agency, and again, whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent or somewhere else, the idea that government can be weaponized against you, that's a slope that once we go down that path. So this idea of Trump being indicted, think about that for a minute. You can like Trump, you can dislike Trump, doesn't matter. The fact that our president of the United States is being charged with a crime, and even your Democrat pundits are looking at this case that Bragg has assembled and said, this is convoluted. There's not a case here. This is a scary moment in history. We've got to fix that. And I don't want to speak for Comer, who's over on oversight, the chair of oversight, or Chairman Jordan, judiciary, but they're both working very hard to hold the agencies accountable and to create a process by which those individuals that abused their authority will be punished. Grant?
And Congressman, this will be the last question that we have time for tonight as we're wrapping this up here. Here's the final question of the night. Where does China fall within the priorities of problems that we face as a nation, and why?
Well, the simple answer to that is they're at the top of the list. And, we could have a debate. One of the things we didn't talk about was immigration. And when I say immigration, I mean illegal immigration. We have a border that's wide open. I mean, in recent months, hitting 300,000 people coming into this country illegally per month. Since Biden has taken office, roughly, it's estimated 6 million people have invaded our country through our southern border. 6 million. To give you context, the state of Tennessee is 7 million people. You have roughly 16 states, maybe 18 states, that don't have a population of 6 million people. And so whether it's China, whether it's the southern border, a combination thereof, we've got some big problems facing this country. And again, why it's frustrating for me to have an administration that's more focused on a woke agenda than they are the fact that we're being invaded at our southern border. They're more worried about a woke agenda and spending your tax dollars on that agenda than they are addressing the fact that China is pumping the cartels, Mexico, full of the chemicals to make fentanyl, which is sweeping across our country. And so every small town in America is now a border town because of fentanyl. I mean, literally just a few months ago, you had a middle school teacher who confiscated a bag of candy, opened it up, touched it, smelled it, and ended up ODing because he touched the candy, which wasn't candy. It was drugs, and it was laced with fentanyl. And so those chemicals are coming from China, and China is doing it intentionally. The balloon, the spy balloon that crossed our country, that was from China. They did it intentionally. The incursions into airspace and threatening Taiwan, they're doing it intentionally. And by the way, Taiwan is a strategic partner for us. And the idea, the notion that China would take Taiwan is problematic because it would give China access to deep ports. And, of course, that's problematic for both Australia and Japan. We're out of time. We really didn't touch on that. But, again, it's like I said at the opening, we're at a crossroads in this country, politically, culturally, economically, but also on the world stage because China, in my opinion, China and Russia see us as weak. They see this president as weak. I mean, for heaven forbid, for goodness sakes, I should say, you had a spy balloon literally cross the continental United States, was maneuvering over military installations, and we didn't do a flipping thing until after it exited our landmass. That's unconscionable. That's reckless. That's borderline treasonous. And nothing was done, only because of the American people. And so the answer is we, the people, have to get engaged. We have to stand up and we have to fight. And just like me, when you stand up and you fight and you don't bow down, you're going to get attacked. But I signed up for this job, honor to do this job. And I appreciate every single one of you being on the call tonight for all the great questions. It's a little bit of a fire drill on my end because I don't know what I'm going to get asked. So, there's a lot of prep that goes into it. I hope I answered your questions fully. If not, please sign up for the newsletter. We'll give you as much information as we can, but also feel free to reach out and ask questions because, one of the things that I've tried to do, I went up there to legislate. I went up there to offer amendments and legislation to affect change, to fight for the American people. I'm fighting for me and I'm fighting for you, but you know what? I'm fighting for my kids. I'm fighting for their future because the America that they're growing up in, their tomorrow isn't what I grew up in. And I long for the days of Mayberry. And Mayberry wasn't perfect. But we've got to get back to simpler times where family matters, where children matter, where parents are in charge of their education, where a woke and weaponized government stays out of our lives and out of our bedrooms, for Pete's sake. It's a free country. Go be you. But you have no right to tell me how to live my life. I am a Christian. I'm a father, and I'm a husband, and I'm proud of that fact. And I will continue to be proud of that fact. And you should be proud of you being you. I want to thank you all again for being on tonight. I'm gratefully humbled at the honor to serve you, to serve our country. God bless you all.
Thank you again to everybody for joining us for tonight's Teletown Hall with Congressman Andy Ogles. If you did sign up for our newsletter tonight, make sure to check your inboxes on Saturday for the updates for everything happening in D.C. and Tennessee's 5th Congressional District. We all look forward to talking to you again very soon. Good night.